Welcome to Brave Inflections. My name is Claudelle von Eck. I have with me today Muzi Sikhakhane SC. And I wanted to make sure that we all understand what that means, because SC for me in my world is not something that I really understood. So SC is Senior Counsel, and this is really the highest level that advocates achieve in terms of in South Africa. Muzi, to SC, is it South Africa specific, or is that
Yes.
used? Is South Africa specific?
In the UK, they would call it QC. Yeah.
QC. Okay. All right.
Queen's
So,
Counsel.
so for those of you in the UK, he's a QC. So senior counsel, and has been in the world of law for many, many years, and has dealt with some very interesting cases. But Muzi, firstly, let me ask you this question, peeking into your world for a second. Why law? I mean, if I look back at my childhood, it never crossed my mind as an option. Why did you decide to go into law?
I didn't decide, it was an accident. my option would have been priesthood. And then I became a teacher. And then I came into law much later, actually.
Talk about priesthood. So can I tell you the secret quickly? My very, very, very first career choice was to be a missionary. So you and I should have met long ago.
We should have. And I think I've done two of those. I've been a lecturer, I've been a teacher, I've been a lawyer, which is stuff I liked, and I never became a priest. But I chose it, I think, later in life, because I think if you look at all of those choices, they're about people. I think I have an interest in people, their souls and their lives, and what happens in their lives. And I think those careers, law to me is the same as the choice I would have made, I wanted earlier, which is to be a priest, or when I was a teacher. And so it's just about people, their lives and justice, and how the world treats them.
So here's something. I'm going to ask you this question because it's something that has been at the back of my mind for myself for such a long time. And that is, your first career choice was really about wanting to save the world. But do you think that people who want to save the world, who have this particular interest in people and wanting to help people, that there's a risk that you can also get a little bit of a savior mentality?
I think it happens. Yeah, I think it happens later. And that's why I talked at the other interview one day about self-reflection. It's something we should do every day, because whatever we do has the potential to be bad, even if it was good. And so you may start thinking you are empathetic and then become patronizing. You can start thinking you want to serve the world and then become thinking you're the only one that can do so. And so I think it's better than the opposite, though. It's better to want to save the world and others than to be the person that doesn't care. I would rather be the person that cares about the others and the world, rather than the other person who doesn't.
Yeah, and you touched such an important aspect of that around self-awareness. And I often find that, and I see this in the coaching practice and the spaces where I find myself in terms of leadership and so forth, that there often is this lack of self-awareness, but this lack of self-reflection, an ability to look at yourself from the outside in, and to be brutally honest with yourself, because you need to be honest with yourself, especially if you've already decided, I am this good person who wants to work in the interest of the greater good, and not seeing when you're stepping over that line, when it's no longer good, but there is now some other elements there.
I think every day, I start with that every morning. I think every day you need to look at your errors of yesterday every day, every morning, and see where you went wrong, no matter how painful it is. At least you are alone. You're not telling anyone.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And then if you can be honest with yourself, I mean, that just helps you to evolve so much faster than under normal circumstances. But Muzi, I'm now having this conversation with you in the middle of a crisis in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I know that you're stuck in one of the risk areas and you haven't been able to get home. So once again, thank you for making the time to have this conversation with me. Muzi, often people don't understand the relationship between law and politics. How would you explain that relationship to lay Claudelle, who hasn't got a cooking clue?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's because we tend to define politics narrowly. We think, well, because politics is about parties, party politics, therefore it's separate from law. But actually, politics is the governance of human activity, of adjudication. It's about human lives. And then law is an offshoot of that. It's a mechanism of adjudicating human disputes within that political. And so when people say it's not law, it's politics, I think they are talking about party politics. They're not talking about politics broadly as the affairs of human beings. And my sense is that law is right at the heart of politics because it's about people. It doesn't matter what we think. I said last time that even if you are dealing with a lease agreement, it's actually about a relationship about those who have property and those who don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, a divorce matter is actually about gender relations in society. And so law is right at the heart of politics.
Sure. And I think most people don't really think deeply about it because we tend to see law as something that is created somewhere else by some group of people and that is imposed on us. And we don't see the us as the people in the politics.
Well, it may not be a fault. It's probably our fault, people who are in law, that we think of ourselves that way. We think of ourselves as an exclusive group that knows more than the rest. And we forget that we're actually just a part of that society. Look at it now, this crisis you're talking about in this country now. It's actually because lawyers do not have foresight about politics to say, if we decide this way, this is what will happen. It's a conservative study in that way. And that's why what we see today, in your world, you could have foreseen it, but lawyers couldn't foresee it because we are arrogant about our profession. And we do not see society broadly. We see our careers and the money and us in ropes in court, and we think life ends with our decisions.
Sure. Look, I would say that you probably see that kind of thing in lots of professions, because it's a very blinkered approach without looking at the consequences, without looking at the implications, without looking at the ethical implications, that one looks from a rules perspective as opposed to how this would affect human beings. So yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that you raise that as an issue within your profession, but I do think other professions also need to reflect.
Yeah, I think it's there. I'll give you an example. I mean, what's happening today, when I told the Deputy Chief Justice, let's take a responsible route. I told him in November, public, when I was asking for his recusal, It looked like arrogant. It looked like, no, it's not the rule of law. But personally, I could see where things would end up if we were not responsible. And unfortunately, we were prepared for vengeance. We were prepared to demonstrate that we are committed to the rule of law, whatever that is called, to land our country into a crisis like this. It was all avoidable.
And I'm wondering whether the application of mind and the ability to have some foresight hasn't become significantly diminished across the board, because I honestly believe that one sees the same kind of thing in various variations in lots of professions. That has got maybe something to do with the fact that we've lost our critical thinking ability, and we've lost our integrated thinking ability.
Yeah.
So we think in silos, and we think laterally, but we're not able to necessarily connect all the dots.
Yeah.
And part of that may be in the training. So I think our schooling system, there may be issues that we've got to deal with.
I think so.
So connecting the dots is an issue. Is not always that easy.
It's not easy, as we say. You and me are talking about things that are very difficult: self-reflection, self-awareness, and then the ability to see beyond yourself, to see things beyond yourself. And I think our schooling system, not just in South Africa, I think all over the world, I think we don't teach critical thinking. And people, I mean, look at the crisis we have, and all you hear is people pouring scorn rather than analyzing, putting themselves in the shoes of different classes of people, their psychology and all of this. So what we do, we condemn, we pour scorn, because I think we are unable to provide solutions because we care less about the psychology of a class outside our class.
Yeah, that's true, and it does make it, I think, even more complex when you sit with a country that is as diverse as South Africa. I always say our diversity is our blessing and our curse at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm sitting here, people right in front of me, 200 meters. It's a group of white South Africans, and they are standing there with rifles. And I said to one of them, "Who said people are attacking you?" And I said to him, "What do you think you're protecting us against?" And said, "Thieves." I said, "You see, that's the problem. Once you start describing people that way, you're not solving the problem." And I think that is where we're lacking. We're lacking it in society, but I also think our leaders lack that. They jump into PR mode instead of solving problems.
Yeah, that PR mode is an issue. I agree with you. But let's talk a little bit more about the diversity. So when you have a diverse country and like South Africa, and that diversity could quite easily result in conflicting views around what is right and what is wrong. I remember sending out a tweet, I think it was on Saturday, I can't remember, the days are a bit blurred in my head at the moment, but it was a very simple tweet. I just said, you can't correct a wrong with another wrong. Wow. And somebody responded and said, what if I don't think the wrong is wrong? Yeah. So how, when you have that kind of diversity and we don't have agreement, a common understanding of what is right and wrong, how do you create law in that context?
Well, it's an important point, because that point is actually solved by leadership. And when I say leadership in society, I'm not talking about politicians. I see you as a leader in society, our intelligentsia, our priests, our politicians, and everybody. I think in order to level those differences between people and how they see them, how they see the difference between right and wrong, you also have to strive for equality, economic justice, because once you have that, you move a little closer to people agreeing about other things. But the guy who lives in a shack with no employment, who's miserable, and I'm a senior counsel, I have 2 double-storied houses. We live in different worlds, and it's quite unlikely that the 2 of us, I'm just lucky I come from poverty too, but suppose I didn't, I wouldn't really know what makes him tick and what worries him every day. I'm worried now because my daughter and I are stuck in this house. We have no bread, just for a day, right? I'm already worried, but there are people who live like this every day of their lives.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's a leadership issue, is that leaders must be able to see things before they happen. And so when you create economic equality, there are other society's dimensions and problems and maladies that you solve just by ensuring that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, it's the question around how do we come to agreement around what is wrong and what is right. I mean, it's the same as with ethics. I mean, I always think that people tend to think about ethics very simplistically, because often we see when people talk about ethics, they think about it only in the context of fraud and corruption, and it's such a broad concept, that if we were really to dig deep and we have a deep conversation, we may then find that actually we don't agree on what is ethical. But if the foundation is not right, and that's what I'm hearing you saying, is that if we don't have a society where everybody is standing on the same equal platform, then it becomes a whole lot more difficult to have the conversation around what is right and wrong.
It's even difficult to have the conversation. I mean, in my profession, we have it a lot. Lawyers talk about ethics a lot, right? But I don't think we are the most ethical in the world. And we do it because we come from a position of superiority over others. And I think what happens in societies, you will find that those classes that are, let's call them superior for lack of a better word, think ethics is valueless, or the rule of law. These are valueless concepts. No, these concepts are not valueless. They are littered with our own preferences, our own socialization. And that's why when and race and gender, all of those things come into play. And so it is for that reason that, for instance, you would find that I would be told that I'm touting if I gave a friend of mine who's an attorney 20,000 Rand to pay for his bond, right? It would be called corruption because he's an attorney, I'm touting. But a white colleague could well take a group of attorneys that are their friends to the US to watch cricket, or to West Indies to watch cricket, and they don't see anything wrong. And both these things are wrong, but the same person does not judge them the same way. And I think when you create equality, at least you start the conversation between people from a position of, let's call it a common intellectual position, because our intellectual positions are also not valueless. They're informed by our own experiences, our lived reality. They are not, I'm reading a book now, Claudelle. It's written by a guy called Ernesto Fernandez, right? It's actually someone called Philip. It's called What We Think and Why We Think It. It's, and it's an interesting concept because it talks about exactly this thing, that nothing is valueless. And so through equality in society, we try and bridge the gap you're talking about between different concepts about what's right and wrong. You can never fully agree, but at least you bridge that gap so that you have a manageable society. And that's why when people say we have the best constitution in the world, I always laugh, because this is a cliche, that a country that is the most unequal in the world boasts that its constitution is the best in the world.
It's a contradiction, right?
It's just a contradiction in terms.
Yeah. And you're kind of touching on where I wanted to go next, and that is the Constitution itself. So we're hearing on the one hand, we've got the best Constitution in the world, but you also have critics of the Constitution where people are decrying the Constitution. Do you think we've got gaps in the Constitution, or is it just a matter of we are not using it properly?
I think we've got serious gaps. And in order to understand those gaps, you must go back to the nature of our political settlement. I don't think this document is a product of goodwill only. I think it's a product of goodwill, but it's also a product of a design to maintain a particular status quo economically. And we need to keep looking at those, because many compromises are made when people discuss a constitution, but I think it's got many, many gaps. And every time you hear people say it's the best document in the world, just next time, Claudelle, someone says that to you, check which class they belong to. And you will see there's only one class that tells you that. It's my class and yours.
Yeah.
And so that tells you that even that comment is not valueless. It's because it's a document that keeps the status quo. And people who like the status quo are those who are comfortable. So there are gaps we need to, and people say, is it aspirational, a document, and that it's about what we want for the future? I don't believe that. I believe a constitution must first and foremost deal with the lived reality of its people. And of course, there may be things in it that are about the future and all of that. But if it can't answer the questions about today, about the now, you'll end up with the mayhem we're having.
So I think that the part of the problem as well as human beings, that we do have this tendency of clustering in groups, but also self-preservation. And that's a huge one. So you want to maintain the status quo because you want to preserve self. But it is also very difficult for us to acknowledge to ourselves that in saying my self-preservation is more important than the needs of other people, I am elevating myself, and that in itself is a problem. Yeah. But people won't admit that, right? So we go into denial around these things.
That's why I believe that if you're going to have a discussion about society and yourself, you've got to be honest. We have to be honest. I also think, I don't think you are free, fully free, until others are around you. And I think we're seeing that now. I'm sitting in this double-storied house, the gate closed. Who am I scared of? The voiceless. They've just become more powerful than I am today.
Yeah. And it's funny, as human beings, we don't learn from our own history.
We don't.
Because history is littered.
Yep.
And we end up making the same mistakes over and over again, because there's probably a degree of it's not going to happen to me. I'm going to be okay. Yeah. I was saying to a friend of mine just yesterday that I'm one of those people who have been saying for years, people, we're sitting on a time bomb.
Yeah.
This bomb is going to explode. We're sitting on a time bomb. Now that it's exploding, I'm going, my God, this is really happening. But Claudelle, you predicted this would happen. but I didn't mean it. It's like I didn't. You say these things, but there's a difference between fully comprehending the impact and what it is that we're really dealing with, as opposed to making a cognitive prediction.
Yeah, I think we talked about the schooling system. We have many bright people and bright students and bright people in general. But without judgment and wisdom and experience, your brain means absolutely nothing much for society. And I think that's what we're lacking. We're lacking judgment, we're lacking foresight, but most of all, we're lacking humility. To accept. This morning, a minister who called me was saying they are going into the communities to galvanize communities against the looters. And I said to him, do it, but you're turning communities against one another. And in 1 hour of that discussion between us, in Vosloorus, one group of taxi drivers, they were already shooting the citizens. And I phoned him back and I said, you see, I told you, the solution is something else, not this knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
And it's self-reflection, it's honesty, it's humility about what we don't know, and to get others to advise us. And we often don't do that because we always have an instinct to be the cleverest in the room, even under very difficult circumstances.
Yeah. But also we lack empathy. And so for me, empathy is your ability to look through the lens of somebody else and understand what it is that they see. And we've got this tendency of thinking that what we see is what everybody else sees.
Yeah, we create our own world. It's an important, I think if we all did that, to see the world not only from our own perspective, and try that all the time. And I think we would create better leadership, not because you should condone the other world. We can't condone the world of a rapist or the world of a thief, but it would help you to just sociologically to understand that community. How does this person think and what makes him think this way? And why do little children and their parents, without covering their faces, go to macro and steal with 2 children? Most parents wouldn't do that. The only way to understand that is not to pour scorn, is to understand the world where this person lives and what is important to him or her on a daily basis.
Yeah, and part of that, because you're talking about the humility, part of that is to have enough humility within yourself to acknowledge that the possibility exists that if you were in exactly the same circumstances, you may not have acted differently. That's tough.
I don't know. I don't think I'm corrupt. I've never been or a thief. But I don't know what I would do if I was disbarred. I have nothing, no source of income, but I need to maintain my children and my houses and property. I don't know whether I would be as ethical as I've always been. Maybe I'm ethical because the conditions allow me to be.
Yes, and that is such an important point. Yeah, I'm ethical because the conditions allow me to. Now, I am one of those who, like, when we're talking about I'm an ethical person, I've gotten to a point where I no longer say that. I say I practice ethics. Because and practicing ethics and applying ethics intelligence, as opposed to trying to deceive myself into thinking that I'm 100% ethical, because until you have been tested, you don't know.
You actually don't know. It's and also even that may be coming from a position of superiority, and you forgive yourself. You know what human beings do every day, and that's why we're not honest with ourselves. We wake up to forgive ourselves and to justify the things we do. And that's why it's taken me long to write something like, I've been asked by many people to write an autobiography, and I think it's such an arrogant thing to do, to think someone wants to read about your life. But secondly, who writes about themselves critically?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do I say about my faults? Can I just admit my faults without explaining them, without justifying them?
Yeah.
Almost impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. No, very few people attain that level of consciousness. Absolutely. Yeah. Listen, I want to circle back to the talk about the Constitution has gaps, but there are also other pieces of legislation, lots of pieces of legislation in the country. When law no longer serves society, or may never have served society, what can the average person, average citizen do in terms of utilizing their agency? You know, because I think a lot of people either don't apply their minds to how law is serving us as a society, but even so, when they don't feel it serves us as a society, feel that we're helpless. We go into this learned helplessness.
I think you must hold those who make the laws more accountable to society than they are. And I think it's easier to achieve that relationship between law and communities if those who make the law, and I'm talking about judges and parliamentarians, are accountable to society and know that the law they practice, the law they make, is to serve humanity. And I think if we can bridge that gap, and there are a couple of ways to bridge it, is how you elect your leaders, who becomes your leader, and what does the system tell you must do if they no longer serve you. And I think that's one of the ways we need to change in the Constitution.
But I think it also does say that as citizens, you can't exercise your agency if you also don't reflect on self. Because we want these parliamentarians to reflect, we want the judges to reflect, but we as citizens must also reflect on how we choose them. And not going into victim mentality because we voted people into power.
These people come are a reflection of who we are, first of all. They come from us, from our society. They're not different. They lack self-reflection like I do, like we do. And so we need, and you can only achieve that, and maybe that's why I wanted to be a priest and a teacher and all of these things, is that I think you need to reach society wherever you can reach them. And religion for me, I mean, forget fanaticism, but religion has a role in the sense that it can reach souls of people that you can't reach. And so it's not unimportant. It's a social construct maybe, but it's not unimportant as a means to reach the inner souls of human beings that you want to cooperate in your society and to live meaningfully. And that's the spiritual side of people you were talking about.
Yes.
That we neglect a lot.
Yeah.
Spirituality and religion always suffer when societies think they are becoming intellectual.
This is so true, and it's yeah, that's part of the human condition, I tell you.
That's why most people who most of my friends, people who are not religious at all, the reason they think so, it's because there's a misconception that the more you question religion, the more intellectual you are. It's not true that you're clever because you don't accept spirituality or religion. There's a lot of intellectual depth in philosophy, in religion, in spirituality. We just need to understand the universe more than we do.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There is this dimension that because it is unseen, but it's also, I suppose you can link it to, there's the spiritual component, and spirituality may mean different things for different people. But even in the emotional space, that people think it's fluffy things, and those are actually the hard things to deal with.
Very hard. Yeah.
But let me ask you this last question. Can you apply sound law and get unethical consequences, outcomes?
Yes. Because narrowly, law is not always justice, right? You need an effort to have just results, right? It's quite possible to apply law, and it happened in many societies. And they will tell you, the judges will tell you, they've applied the law, and that law has resulted in death, in poverty. We have this mayhem today because a judge or judges were applying the law, and they may have forgotten humanity and consequences of certain decisions. And so it's quite possible. That's why it requires people who can think beyond the legal space. Law itself. My complaint about law and the judges is that we're missing human beings in the legal fraternity. We have lawyers, but we're missing human beings.
Yeah, that is quite a heavy nugget to end off on, but I agree with you that that application of mine in terms of, I'm a consequentialist, you know, and unapologetically so, that one has to look at consequences. You can't just have a narrow blinkered approach on everything. You must think about how far is this thing going to ripple, who is going to be affected, and at the end of the day, does it serve the greater good or doesn't it? You know, otherwise, what are we doing?
Yeah, what are we lawyers for? To make money and to write judgments. And so it's important for us to, you know, Vuyani says this a lot because he thinks about these things. To say, do we as lawyers, we keep saying we take this decision because the other court made that decision. What if it was unjust? And the consequences at that time are dire. What do we take it simply because we want to conform with the law? I believe we must lead better, even in the legal fraternity, because I think we impact people's lives greatly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you very, 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 very much for being so generous in sharing your thoughts with me, Muzi. This is the first of two videos. If you've watched this and you enjoyed it, please go and look and have watch the other one as well. Muzi is one of those people whose brains I respect because there is deep thinking, and I think it is so important. I wanted to have this conversation with him just to help us to get to a point where we start to think deeper about decisions that we make, the impact that we have. And Muzi's come through the lens of law, the world of law to a large degree. But a lot of part of what we've discussed today, you can go and literally just take it as is and go and put in any other profession and have the similar conversations around other professions, because the professions really collectively are the pillars of society. And if our professions are lacking deep thought, application of mind, but very importantly, empathy and understanding how it's serving society, that is how we collapse societies. Thank you very much. I hope you found some nuggets, and thank you for visiting the website, and I encourage you to go and look at any other, go and look at the rest of the website. There's lots of other nuggets on there as well. And if you feel that there's something that you would like me to cover, please leave me a note on the website. I'll have a look at it, and if I can, I'll definitely address it. And subscribe to the website. You can also go to the YouTube channel and subscribe there. Once again, thank you very much, Muzi.
Thank you. I think I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.